On this season of the Keep Growing podcast, we're digging for victory. Here's your host, John Morgan.
In our last episode, we covered planting your victory garden. Now it's time to nurture it into a productive space that will produce an abundance of healthy food. Way back at the beginning of the lockdown, I had the pleasure of chatting with Stephanie Rose about her newest book, Garden Alchemy. It's an awesome book because all the techniques in the book use items that are readily available at home. Stephanie Rose is an award-winning author, freelance writer, instructor, and international speaker who aims to encourage healing and wellness through gardening. For over 10 years, she has been both a student and teacher of organic gardening, permaculture design, herbalism, and natural skincare formulation. She is a member of Garden Communicators International, the Permaculture Institute of North America, and the International Herb Association, and volunteers to develop children's gardens as a Vancouver Master Gardener. She shares stories, recipes, and projects on her inspiring website, gardentherapy.ca. Stephanie has written several books including Home Apothecary, The Natural Beauty Recipe Book, and Garden Made, a year of seasonal projects to beautify your garden and your life, which was a gold medal winner from the 2016 Independent Publishers Book Awards. Stephanie's latest book, Garden Alchemy, was released in February. Stephanie spends her time as a gardener, writer, and artist in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. She is passionate about organic gardening, natural healing, and art as part of life. Stephanie lives with her family, a motley crew of animals, which provide her with inspiration and delight both in and out of the garden. Let's jump right into the interview. How did you get your inspiration and your idea for the book?
So I started gardening because I became severely ill and disabled overnight. I got a headache in 2006 and I wasn't able to get out of bed for 2 years. I went back to basics in order to heal myself. And over the next 10 years, I spent time going to the library and getting every book on gardening, reading everything that I could, and then going out into my yard and practicing what I learned. As you can imagine, after about 2 years in bed, my body was weak and my mind was weak. So it was really a process of rehabilitation to get out there and strengthen my mind through learning the science behind gardening and getting out and testing out and experimenting with plants in my garden. And I couldn't go that far. So I used my own land as the place where I did my rehabilitation. And it's strangely similar to what we're doing, what's happening now in the world, where we're confined to home and, we're getting back to basics and learning all these new skills. So I'm really happy that I was able to put a lot of the DIY components of getting back to gardening into Garden Alchemy so that, we can use it to relearn about our land and use it to learn how to get back to the land and how we can build those skills, those back to basic skills of gardening.
Yeah, and that's what I really like about your book is that it uses tools that pretty much everybody has readily available at home. Something that I use that's kind of ubiquitous around my house is mason jars. And mason jars popped up more than once in your book. And I'm constantly using them, whether it's for mixing things or for seed storage, different applications like that. And I like the way that you divide up the book into 5 different chapters, and each one focuses on a very kind of fundamental building block of gardening and gardening organically.
Yeah, that's true. So I started off the first chapter with soil because I feel like that's where we need to start. Go down to the roots, go down to the ground, and start at the ground level. So but it's about experimentation. There's so much information out there about what you need to add to your soil and how to test your soil and how we should send away our soil for lab tests. But really, in the home garden, all we need to know is how our garden is structured, how our soil is structured, and then how can we work with it better. So the first chapter is built on doing some experiments, like a soil composition test, which is like soil 101. You take the soil from your garden, put it into a mason jar, which I also love, and I have 100 of them, in various forms all around my house, doing things like sourdough starter and sprouting, and then soil tests. So you add a little bit of soil to the jar, fill it up with water, shake it to mix those two, and then let it settle. Then you can see your soil composition. You can see as it settles over about 24 hours, you'll be able to see the level of sand, silt, and clay. You can see your mix of what makes up your garden. It's great to know, if you have a high clay component, if you have a high sand component, you're trying to get to that nice balanced loam, which is great for growing everything. But the way to get there is to add organic matter to your soil. So you could skip that step in theory and just add organic matter to your soil. Or you could add organic matter to your soil, which is compost or green manures, mix it into your soil, allow it to build the soil structure, and then test it again and see if you're starting to balance out your soil composition. So there's one like that in a mason jar. I also use mason jars to do soil pH testing at home, which is, again, you don't even need any special equipment. You can just use some home ingredients like vinegar and baking soda to do a soil pH test. And yeah, that's the key. Is if you have it in your kitchen right now, you can use it to grow seeds, things like egg cartons and old Tupperware containers can be used as seed starters, newspapers, even toilet tissue rolls, which may become more of a prized commodity right now than we thought they ever would be. But yeah, really going back to basics and using what you have to learn about your garden, and then you can build a stronger garden from the ground
Yeah, I had that in my notes was the toilet paper seed tape section.
up. Right? Yes, I
Yeah.
also have toilet tissue as seed tape. And at the time I wrote the book, I didn't think that toilet tissue would be such a prized commodity.
It's amazing how much things have changed just in a few weeks.
Right, I know. The world is totally different. But, gardens have been growing like this for a really long time. So, it's our opportunity to really get an understanding of how gardens do grow. And, part of how the projects are laid out in this book, it's laid out like a cookbook. So you can flip through and find the recipes that you want to use for your garden that make the most sense for you. When we have a cookbook, we don't start at the beginning and then cook everything in order. So it's the same with Garden Alchemy. You can just pick out what works for you. So I like that. I like that people can sort of take their time and build their gardening skills over the months to years. And then if they've got seedlings started and there's some damping off, then they can make a the chamomile tea recipe as a spray to prevent damping off and treat damping off on their seedlings. Just really easy things that, you probably have some chamomile tea. And if you don't, grab some seeds and grow some chamomile flowers this year because it's a really great herb to have in your garden.
Yeah, speaking of tea, you have a whole section on fertilizers and garden teas. And something that I'd never run into before was creating a green garden tea. Um, I've always heard of compost teas, and uh, here in my office, I use a worm casting tea to fertilize my houseplants in my office. But yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so so green garden tea can often be confused with a compost tea. So compost tea is where you're brewing the microorganisms. There's also a compost dilution where you can dilute. And do you do that um, with your vermicompost? So you dilute it in water and then use that to fertilize your indoor plants?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that, yeah, I'm calling that a dilution. So,
Hmm.
or the grandmother's method, where you take your compost and you're diluting it with water and then using it to really spread the microbes and the components of the compost around your garden. It gives you, a little bit more of a spread. If you're making a brewed compost tea, and I've got um, little simple brewer that you can do in a bucket with a pond, not a pond, but aquarium bubbler, and you put a little bit of compost into I use a nut milk bag because I like that mesh, and you're brewing the microorganisms so that you're actually spreading that soil wildlife throughout your garden. But a garden tea is like tea that you make to like a chamomile tea or a mint tea that you sip, at night. You're brewing those plant leaves, the cuttings from your garden. So it could be um, the lawn clippings, which are really high in nitrogen and great for fertilizing your garden, or anything that you're cutting back in your garden that is disease and pest free. You can add those into a bucket of water and let it sit out for 72 hours in the sun to steep, and then strain out that green material and use that to water your garden. So I've got a couple of different ways of doing it in the book. One is to build a colander system out of two buckets. And so if you're adding in your garden clippings and everything that's disease and pest and weed free into the top bucket, which has got holes drilled into the top of it, then you'll lift that top bucket out and it will drain into the second bucket below. And you can take that green material, throw it in the compost bin, and then use the second bucket to water your garden. But if you want to use your weeds, which weeds have a lot of beneficial nutrients in them, some of them have those really great long taproots, like dandelions, that we're digging way down to get those taproots out. They're mining for minerals way down deep in the soil, and those minerals go up into the leaves. And so when we're pulling those out of our garden, those nutritious leaves can go right into instead of doing the colander where there might be weed seeds that get in. You don't want to inadvertently spread those throughout your garden. You can put them in a pillowcase. So make a giant tea bag by putting weeds in a pillowcase, tying up the pillowcase, filling it with water, and then straining that out after 72 hours and using it to water your garden.
The last section of your book, it deals with birds, bees, and then also bugs. And I like a lot of the DIY like bird feeding methods, like making your own soot. Um, Especially like how you used the mug and made the little stick. And that's that's really cool. Um, but something that you covered in it was on the bug portion is having kind of a sacrificial area in your garden. Talked about an aphid nursery of attracting pests to one area, and that kind of takes the heat off your main garden plants. Um, but that's kind of an interesting method that I think a lot of people, especially in our area where it's more rural, they have the space to do something like that. So I thought that was a very interesting method.
Yes, well, the whole chapter is based on creating enough of an ecosystem in your garden, inviting wildlife in, so that it helps to balance out your garden. If you're inviting in predatory insects and birds and lizards and small mammals into your garden, they're actually, I mean, yes, they want to, some of them want to, feast on some of your plants, but many of them also want to feast on the pests in your garden. And so inviting them in is like bringing in an army of free labor to come and do the work for you. And so it can be a little bit of a challenge for people to get there because they want, this holy grail of completely pest-free gardens and, not seeing any bugs or other wildlife coming and, spending time in the garden. But inviting them in, allowing the pest population to get to a certain threshold gives enough reason for the predatory insects and for the birds to come in and feast on them. So I always try to, take these sacrificial plants, the plants that the aphids absolutely love, and put them away from my prize plants and allow the populations to grow enough that it invites in the birds, the predatory wasps, the ladybugs, all the insects that are going to feast on the aphids. And you can do this with all sorts of pests. It's just looking at, if you've got a pest problem, think about what are they eating of yours and then what eats them, and seeing if you can build that ecosystem and create the cycle so that you're not having, to run out there with a hose and hose them off every day, or, worse, spray them. But allow the work to be done for you while you're sitting and enjoying a cup of tea and enjoying the garden or doing other things. Of course, let's be frank, we're probably doing other things, but I like to imagine that I'm sitting and sipping a cup of tea while the predatory insects are taking care of my aphids for me.
Yeah, something that I did last year was one whole end of my property. I kind of turn back into a meadow, and it was interesting just to see the plants that came up in that area because I normally mow that whole area. But something that I noticed is it attracted a lot of the insects away from the garden, and just letting it grow for that one season, I noticed things like voles preferred that area. So that's a common problem that I have on my property is voles getting into everything, and they all sort of migrated to the meadow area. So I didn't have a problem around the house or out in the garden anymore, and it was
Yeah.
great. And something that I'm hoping to do is eventually mix in some kind of strategic plantings of wildflowers and fruit trees and different things like that into the meadow area.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that little food forest and creating a space for wildlife to be wildlife. And you don't know what it's going to invite in, but in that case, maybe something's gonna start, visiting your property more regularly to eat the moles, and that'll help keep the pest population down for you as well. I love that.
Well, it's been great talking to you. Um, the book is Garden Alchemy. If people want to find out more, what is a good way to get in touch with you or to find out more about your book?
Well, my website is called gardentherapy.ca. I'm in Canada, Vancouver, BC, Canada. So that's why it's .ca at the end. But you can usually find me by just Googling garden therapy or garden therapy Stephanie. I come up on there. And so my website has lots of information on where to find Garden Alchemy. It's at every major bookstore, which, online we can now order them. I have some signed copies that I'm going to be sending out. But mostly, I think, let's do no contact and people can grab it online. And I also have tons of free resources on my website, Garden Therapy. So if people want to pop over there, they can go into the gardening section and see lots of, I think I have 1,200 projects, articles, and ideas for DIY gardeners to get out there. So if you're wanting to start your garden or want some new ideas for your garden, and I'm sure there's something in there. I have a weekly newsletter that goes out every week too, and I send that out for free. So if you want to sign up for that, then I send out seasonal ideas. It's called What's in Season. So what kind of garden projects and ideas can we be working on in that day? And I know that, I'm in Vancouver, BC, which is a very different climate than where you're in. But I try to make the projects so that they can span many different climates and seasons. The idea is that you're learning how to DIY your garden and learning about what you have, and then taking the ideas and pulling it together based on the seeds, the produce, the vegetables and fruits, the plants that grow best in your area. Hopefully that helps, and I'd love to see everybody, come over and visit me on Garden Therapy.
Again, you can find Stephanie's book and more information at gardentherapy.ca. For this episode, I have some more garden wisdom, and it's from the author and poet May Sarton. It fits quite nicely with our experiences during the coronavirus lockdown and Stephanie's own experiences and recovery. Maysarton writes, "Everything that slows us down and forces patience, everything that sets us back into the slow circles of nature is a help. Gardening is an instrument of grace." May we all find a little slowness, patience, and grace in the garden during this turbulent time. Until next time, keep growing.
Submit your gardening questions at bobsmarket.com/keepgrowing. The Keep Growing podcast is produced by John Morgan. Copyright 2020 Bob's Market and Greenhouses Incorporated.